I held his hand until the last warmth left it. Dawn pressed through the blinds, thin and gray, and the old clock on the wall ticked steady as if nothing had changed. My grandfather's chest rose once, fell, and stilled. I didn't cry at first, I just listened, like the house itself was waiting for me to confirm what we both already knew. I'd been living here for 3 years, nursing him through slow seasons of forgetting and sudden spells of clarity. He'd taught me how to fold a shirt crisp, how to sharpen a blade, how to sit in silence without flinching. While the rest of the family scattered, new houses, new jobs, new excuses, I stayed. Folks said I was wasting my 20s. Maybe they were right. But when his breath left at dawn, my hand wrapped in his, I knew there was no waste in loyalty. The room still held him, the faint musk of Old Spice in the hallway, floral couches sagging under the weight of decades, dust catching light in the same corners he always told me to sweep. Every drawer opened with a sigh, every floorboard carried a memory. The house was modest, nothing to brag on, but to me it was a kind of scripture, each crack in the plaster a verse. By noon the calls started, cousins I hadn't heard from in months, aunts who never visited. Their voices were syruped with pity on the phone, but turned sharp when the subject of the funeral came up. Costs, who would cover what? My savings were thin from doctor's bills, but I heard the unspoken assumption. Since I'd been living off him, I should foot the burial. One cousin laughed outright. "Girl, he ain't leave nothing but bills. Don't break yourself trying to dress him up like he was somebody." Another muttered something about his wasted life before hanging up. I bit my lip so hard it split. See, they never saw the dignity in his ways. To them he was just a stubborn old man in a too small house, too proud to ask for help, too quiet to show ambition. But I knew better. His dignity wasn't loud, it was folded into the way he polished his shoes even when he wasn't going anywhere, or how he refused to let the front yard grow wild even when his back ached. That evening I sat at his kitchen table, bills and burial estimates spread out like an accusation. My heart ached with grief, but pride braided itself through it. If nobody else would honor him right, I would, even if it meant draining the little I had left, even if I stood alone at that graveside. I whispered it out loud just so the house could hear it. "You won't be forgotten." And for the first time since morning, I felt a strange stillness settle over me, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for what came next. The morning after the calls, I walked the house slow, like I was reintroducing myself to it. Each room felt heavier without him breathing inside it, yet somehow more alive too, as if his spirit had settled into the walls now that his body was gone. I trailed my fingers along the hall paneling, the ridges catching my skin. In the kitchen, the spice rack still lined in perfect rows, paprika, nutmeg, bay leaves, just how he liked them, though his hand shook too bad to cook the last year. A faded note, written in his blocky script, was tucked beside the salt jar. "Check the pipes before winter." I pressed it to my chest like it was a love letter. Grief twisted with something else. Duty. The kind of duty that doesn't let you rest until every corner is acknowledged, every secret tended. So I moved from room to room, notebook in hand, like an archivist. That's when I found him. In the bedroom closet, hidden behind a row of neatly pressed church suits, were stacks of spiral notebooks. I pulled one free, brushing dust off its cover. The first page stopped me cold. Equations, sketched out like a professor's chalkboard, lines of algebra bleeding into something I didn't fully understand. Another book held drawings of machines, angles so sharp they looked like wings. Tucked between them were letters never sent, drafts addressed to names I didn't recognize, some in cursive, some blocky, like he was trying on different versions of himself. My throat tightened. All my life, I'd heard the story. Granddaddy barely scraped through high school, never made something of himself. Family joked about him
tinkering in the garage like it was a sign of smallness, not brilliance. Yet page after page, I saw proof of a man thinking bigger than the four walls folks tried to box him into. For years, I'd carried shame for staying by his side, for defending him when cousins mocked. Now, reverence flooded in. What else had he kept hidden? Who was the man they never bothered to see? I sat on the edge of his bed, notebook spread like an altar around me. It struck me then, how many of our elders bury their brilliance deep, hiding it from ridicule, from theft, from the grinding suspicion this world don't believe black minds can hold genius. My grandfather hadn't been wasting time in that garage. He'd been safeguarding himself. I looked around the room, feeling the weight of all that unseen labor. And then my eyes landed on one thing I had never dared touch, the locked garage door key hanging on a nail by the back door. For the first time, I wanted to know what lay beyond.
That key had hung on the wall my whole childhood, plain as day. Nobody ever asked about it. Maybe we all knew better. The garage was his sanctuary, a line we weren't meant to cross. He'd let me hand him a wrench now and then, but never step past the doorway. "Not for you yet," he'd say, with a half smile. Now, standing in the kitchen with the key warm in my palm, I felt like I was holding a dare. The back door creaked as I pushed it open. The chill of the concrete step bit through my socks, and the air outside smelled of damp leaves and motor oil. I stared at the garage door, its paint chipped and peeling, and for a moment guilt swelled in my chest. Was I betraying him by going in? Would this be crossing into something he never wanted revealed? But the house had been whispering to me since he passed. Every note, every notebook, every careful detail seemed to be leading me here. My hand trembled as I slid the key into the lock. The click sounded louder than it should have, echoing in the quiet yard. I pushed the door. It groaned open, and a wave of air rolled out, thick with oil, dust, and something metallic that reminded me of time itself. My breath caught, quick and shallow. Inside, it wasn't chaos like I expected. Tools hung in precise rows, pegboard filled with outlines of hammers, wrenches, clamps. The workbench stood clean, not cluttered. And in the center of the dim space, two hulking shapes loomed beneath tarps, their outlines sharp and deliberate. I froze. My fingers itched, wanting to pull the covers back, but I forced myself to wait. The sight of those hidden forms rattled me. What if uncovering them changed everything I thought I knew? Sweat prickled the back of my neck despite the coolness of the room. I wiped my palms on my jeans, whispering into the dust-heavy silence. "All right, Granddaddy, show me." The tarps shifted slightly under the draft from the open door, like they were breathing. Secrets, I realized, weren't always shame. Sometimes they were armor. Sometimes you had to keep things locked away to keep them whole. I stepped inside and closed the door, sealing myself in with whatever truths he'd left waiting. The tarp was stiff, heavy with years of dust, but I gripped it and yanked anyway. The fabric rasped across the hood, sending a puff of grit into the air that stung my throat. When the last of it slumped to the concrete, my knees nearly buckled. Beneath the gray shroud sat a white Lamborghini Countach. Angled lines sharp as glass, headlights like a dare. Even coated in dust, it gleamed. For a long moment, I just stared. My grandfather, who wore the same brown loafers for 20 years, who clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, had hidden a legend under our roof. A hot flush of awe ran through me, chased quick by anger. All my life, family mocked him for being small,
called him a burden, laughed at me for wasting my time caring for him. And yet here was proof, undeniable and dazzling, that he'd lived on a scale none of them could even imagine. I pressed my hand to the hood. Cold metal, solid under my palm. The smell of leather faint but still there when I cracked the door open. Inside, the seats were stitched with care, the dash clean, every dial intact. "How?" I whispered into the silence. The question echoed back at me, but I knew it was bigger than money. This car wasn't just purchase, it was statement, protection, maybe rebellion. He'd been more than they said, more than they ever wanted to see. Memories reeled through my mind. The times he'd vanish into the garage for hours, emerging with grease on his hands, but no explanations. The way he shut down jokes about dreaming too big with nothing more than a tight smile. He hadn't been tinkering, he'd been preserving. I wiped at my eyes, smearing dust across my cheek. The myth of his smallness shattered right there on the garage floor. And still, another tarp waited. Its shape was rounder, heavier somehow, red-blooded even beneath the veil of gray. My pulse kicked harder. If the first unveiling had rewritten everything, what would the second do?
I circled the second tarp, like it might bite me. The air in the garage felt thicker, my chest rising too fast, hands slick with sweat. I hooked my fingers under the fabric and pulled slow this time, letting the secret reveal itself inch by inch. First came the curve of a fender, paint still glowing under a veil of dust. Then the long sweep of a hood, low and graceful, like a predator crouched. When the tarp fell away completely, my throat locked. A Ferrari 250 GTO, red as blood, curves smooth as a kept promise. I staggered back against the workbench. This wasn't just a car, it was history on wheels. People killed for machines like this, fortunes traded hands over them. And all this time it had been sleeping in my grandfather's garage, while cousins whispered about him being a failure. Tears blurred my eyes. Not grief this time, but vindication. Every insult, every sneer, every time they treated me like a fool for standing by him, burned away under the weight of this truth. He hadn't been small, he'd been colossal, and he'd chosen silence as his shield. I eased open the driver's side door. The leather was cracked, but still rich, the steering wheel smooth beneath my fingertips. In the glove box, a stack of papers waited. Registrations, insurance slips, even Polaroids of him grinning beside the cars, grease smudged on his cheek. In every photo, his smile was proud, unguarded, like he'd finally been seen. My chest tightened. He hadn't hidden these treasures from shame. He'd hidden them from the vultures, from the same family who would have pawned off his genius for pennies, who would have gutted his dreams without a second thought. I sat behind the wheel, the smell of old leather and gasoline wrapping around me. For the first time in days, I felt something solid under my grief. Purpose. He'd left these things not just to be found, but to be understood. And yet, as I sifted through the glove box, my fingers brushed something different. A plain envelope, sealed tight, with my grandfather's handwriting on the front. Not addressed to anyone, just waiting.
The envelope felt heavier than paper should. My hands shook as I slid my thumb beneath the flap, the sound of tearing paper loud in the quiet garage. For a second I just held it closed again, afraid of what his words might take from me or demand of me. Finally, I unfolded the pages inside. His handwriting tilted across the lines, steady but deliberate, like he'd rehearsed what to say. "To the one who'll see," it began. My chest clenched. He wrote about silence, not as weakness, but as survival. He said he kept his brilliance quiet because the world had a way of stealing from men like him, of laughing until you stopped trying, of turning gifts into burdens. He wrote that he trusted noise less than respect, that noise was cheap, but respect was earned by patience, by care. And then he wrote about me. Not my name, not outright, but he described the one who stays, the one who tends without asking for applause. He said when the time came, that person would know what to do, not for profit, not for spectacle, but for preservation. I pressed the letter to my lips, tears sliding down my face. He'd been waiting for me. All those quiet years, every time he shut the garage door behind him, he wasn't shutting me out. He was waiting for me to be ready. The relief was sharp, almost painful. I wasn't trespassing here. I wasn't betraying him. He had chosen me. Maybe not in words he ever spoke, but in this trust sealed in an envelope. Still, questions swirled. What did he expect me to do with these cars, these notebooks, this entire secret life? Would I keep it hidden as he had, or step into the light and risk the vultures circling? I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into its envelope, and held it against my chest until my heartbeat slowed. The garage hummed around me, tools catching the faint morning sun through a high window. Inheritance, I realized, wasn't just about money. In our families, it was spirit first, meaning before material. If you didn't grasp the spirit, the money made no sense at all. The choice pressed in on me. Keep this to myself or show the world? For days after finding the letter, I barely slept. I'd sit in the garage at night with only a lamp glowing, the notebooks spread across the workbench, the cars standing silent like monuments. The space felt less like storage now and more like a chapel. Every line he wrote, every sketch he left behind, hummed with a kind of hymn I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. But hymns don't pay bills. I couldn't ignore the reality. I was broke. Funeral costs had stripped my account bare. My job barely stretched enough to cover basics, and here I was sitting on a treasure worth more than I could ever imagine. A single auction could change my life, wipe debts clean, buy me freedom, give me a cushion no one in our family ever had. I pictured the headlines. Rare Ferrari discovered in modest garage. My phone buzzing nonstop with calls from cousins who hadn't bothered to bring him soup when he was sick. Reporters knocking on the front door, smiling too wide. Strangers weighing his worth in dollars while I stood invisible in the corner. The temptation was real. My stomach knotted at the thought of breathing easy for once. But every time I leaned towards selling, I'd hear his voice, low and firm. Respect over noise. He hadn't hidden these cars just so I could cash them out to prove something to people who never cared. He'd trusted me with a legacy, not a lottery ticket. One night, I imagined both engines roaring to life, the Countach screaming white lightning, the Ferrari singing deep red thunder. I saw him in the driver's seat, grinning like in those Polaroids, proud and unbothered. The sound of it filled me, louder than doubt. That's when I decided. I wouldn't sell. Not yet. I'd restore, archive, and protect first. I'd honor his brilliance in the same careful silence he'd carried until I knew the right way to tell the story. Legacy wasn't quick cash. Legacy was trust, and I wasn't about to break mine. I locked the garage, slid the key back on its nail, and leaned against the door, heart steady for the first time since the funeral. But a new question rose, sharp as hunger. How do you fund a vow?
That last night, I sat in his favorite chair by the window, the letter folded soft from so many readings, warm in my palm. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the old wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the streetlight buzzed, spilling amber over the porch he swept every Saturday morning, no matter how his back hurt. I spoke into that quiet. I will carry this. The words hung in the air, steady, almost like a vow made in church. And the strangest peace settled over me. Not because the grief had left, it hadn't, but because the grief finally had purpose to lean against. I thought about the days ahead. My family, once they caught wind, would circle quick. Rumors always outrun truth, and greed runs faster than both. They'd come asking, accusing, claiming. The community, too, neighbors with wide eyes, whispers in the pews. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I wasn't a victim of neglect or mockery. I was a keeper now. Keeper of his dreams, his labor, his hidden genius. The girl they laughed at for staying had become the woman entrusted to guard what they couldn't see. I pressed the letter against my chest, feeling the steady rhythm of my heartbeat under the paper. That sound was my anchor. When dawn finally broke, I opened the garage again. Sunlight slanted across the cars, painting them in gold, dust glittering like stars around their frames. I didn't touch them this time. I just stood in the doorway and let the sight fill me. This was the first step of restoration, not wrenches or polish yet, but intention, declaring with my whole body that I wouldn't let his story fade into the cracks. The house breathed with me, and for the first time since he passed, it felt like we were breathing together.